is war, innit? No matter how you carry it on. And we see this as a form of war.
Tonight, TVI looks at the battle behind the steel strike, the battle of the secondary pickets.
Stop the scab!
The industrial face of Britain, and 1980 opens with scenes of secondary picketing which became all too familiar in the 70s. These men are picketing a factory where they're not employed and which is not directly involved in their dispute. The government aim to end confrontations like this with their new employment bill, which will become law this summer. The union members are resisting. They argue that their right to send their troops in where they can hurt most is their chief industrial weapon.
Thanks for your promise. Lying scabs, that's all you are, your drivers. Don't come back, she'll not get in. We'll have 200 or 300 men on here to stop you.
For the Iron and Steel Trades Confederation, the main union concerned, this is the first all-out stoppage since the general strike of 1926. At the beginning of the dispute, they were learners. But in South Yorkshire at least, they didn't have far to go to find a teacher.
I think that you should also have a look at these maps, because it really is important. And I would recommend that you establish a strike headquarters similar to the one that we had, with at least 5 or 6 telephones, and a map of this kind.
The locals in Barnsley call it King Arthur's Castle, the headquarters of the Yorkshire Miners' president Arthur Scargill, the man the steel strikers knew could be relied on to tell them how their strike should be organised to achieve maximum impact.
Well, look, I think the best way I can tackle this is to graphically demonstrate how we operated our strike in 72 and 74. Because like you, we found ourselves, to some degree, learners, and we needed to benefit, in our case, by experience. I think the first requisite is to establish a central strike committee, and this is absolutely paramount.
To Arthur Scargill also it's war. The troops are the union members, the flying pickets are the commandos. He's very careful to avoid using the term secondary pickets, but this is precisely what he's talking about.
Now, there's been a lot of myths in the media, in the press and on television about the flying picket. And the flying picket, of course, is not what the media demonstrates it to be. The flying picket was established in the mining industry a number of years ago, and the real reason behind it was the need to move people very quickly from point to point. And it's done so in 2 parts. First of all, to move large numbers of pickets in coaches and in minibuses. But in addition to that, to move pickets with cars as quickly as possible to other targets that may not be covered. And you can always follow on with substantial pickets afterwards if the need arises.
On show for the strike committee, Scargill's campaign souvenirs from the 2 miners' strikes, a series of logbooks kept by the divisional office and the local strike committees, listing every single incident and even every phone call, and those maps.
We establish a map, and we give to each of the areas on the map targets where pickets will be sent in order to bring, in our case, coal supplies to a standstill, obviously in your case, steel supplies to a standstill, and where the production of steel still continues, I would assume, bring steel production to a standstill. You can see that we've identified the different target areas by a different symbol, and by doing that we're able at an instant, once we have a message relayed to the Central Strike Committee, to tell one of the strike quarters in the area to send a number of pickets.
And so in the miners' offices, the strategy of making the steel strike bite was outlined. According to management, the secondary picketing had an almost immediate effect.
All of our hourly paid workers have been laid off, and in fact we haven't produced since Saturday or the 5th of January.
At the Templeborough rolling mills in Rotherham, most of the workforce belonged to the same union as the pickets who closed them down. They were not involved in the dispute, for at the time the union's national policy was to leave the private sector alone. Works manager Clive Morgan knew they wanted to carry on working, so why did the plant have to close?
It's as a result of the picketing. We've got raw material supplies for 2 weeks, but unfortunately our warehouses are full and the pickets refuse to allow our lorries to cross the picket lines.
As far as you're concerned, is the picketing at this plant, is it primary picketing or secondary picketing?
Well, it must be secondary picketing. We're not involved in this dispute.
The present legislation does not distinguish between primary and secondary picketing, but the new Employment Bill does make that distinction. Under the new law, these pickets at the British Steel Corporation will be within their rights. They're picketing at their own place of employment, and they'll have a legal immunity, which means they can't be sued for damages. But these pickets nearby will not enjoy that protection. They're not employed at the works they're picketing. And once the new law is passed, this company can ask for a court injunction to stop the picketing. The application would be to a civil court. The new law will not make any form of picketing a criminal offence. And it will be left to the courts to decide the penalty if pickets defy any court order.
Well, I'll have to turn round to come out, won't I?
Are you going out, pal? Are you accepting our picket line? Thanks very much.
You're not crossing, are you?
Give a cheer, lads, he's not coming in!
I didn't realise it.
If, as here, pickets turn a lorry away from works where they're not employed, the owner of the company will also have the power to sue them for damages for lost orders or lost production. The wording of the new bill is quite explicit. It shall be lawful for a person in contemplation or furtherance of a trade dispute to attend at or near his own place of work. As Arthur Scargill's miners fuel both the braziers and the enthusiasm of the steel strikers, Sir Hector Lang's words sound prophetic. Now the Conservatives are delivering their election promise to limit picket power to the men's own factory gates. But on today's unrestricted picket lines, the feeling is still that might is right. You're not bothered whether you're secondary picketing or not?
We're not bothered what picketing we're doing. Any kind of picketing that's stopping steel, we'll agree with it. We'll agree on it. We're stopping movements altogether.
Can I ask you whether you think what you're doing here is secondary picketing or primary picketing?
Primary picketing.
Well, primary picketing, presumably, is at British Steel. It's where you should be.
Yeah, they're doing British Steel work.
But this isn't primary picketing, is it? Because you don't work here, you're not employed here.
They're doing British Steel? They're doing our work.
6 a.m. and the pickets gather. Rotas are scanned, flying pickets organised, transport is found and accommodation located. And following Arthur Scargill's advice to the letter, all requests for pickets are funnelled through the strike headquarters.
ISDC, strike control.
That's Steve.
Tis Ron.
Right. We require 4 men to go to Stanton Stable if possible, and a couple of T&G members to go with party.
That's 4 men, Ron, to Stanton Stable and a couple of T&G. OK?
Yeah. Right, thank you.
Ta-ra. 4 Tadfields down on Tinsley Wharf here. I want 6 men to keep up and wire. OK, you want instructions for any place, just anything else. 4 for Whittam's, yeah. All right.
Others are waiting to go to Dover to picket the Channel ports and Birmingham to picket car plants like British Leyland.
What does the lads think about travelling to Birmingham for secondary picketing purposes?
100%, yeah. 100%. They won't be here if they
South Yorkshire, it's 100%.
You could have filled another 10 buses. There were lads coming down here on
Saturday
morning.
Leeds now. They wanted to go to Birmingham.
Yeah, Saturday morning.
Said they were full up.
Wholeheartedly.
Oh, very good, very good.
And we're looking for some support down there.
Well, there's no doubt you'll get the support there. The British Leyland Shop Stewards Combine met yesterday. They've promised 100% support. You'll be getting a list of all the stockists that affect the car industry, so they'll be your main target.
I mean, that incident at Hatfields where that police officer fell down.
Your attention, please. All Birmingham lads at right-hand side of the room and all Dover lads at left-hand side, please.
There were no way that the police officer were injured.
The support is solid, and the organisation by now geared to put it to maximum use.
D. Burke. Yes. N. Matthewman. G. Oxley.
The 250-mile trip to Dover is once again courtesy of the miners. The Kent NUM have financed the pickets and their members will provide accommodation. The plan is to stop foreign steel coming through the Channel ports. And this trip became official. The union's head office caved in to pressure from South Yorkshire and finally gave the pickets their blessing. You've just sent pickets to the docks at Dover and to Birmingham for British Leyland car plants. Now, this is obviously secondary picketing. How do you possibly justify it?
I don't use the term secondary picketing, nor does anybody else in this Divisional Strike Committee or in this Divisional Office. We responded to a request from our central office to assist and send pickets to Dover because they knew that we had a large number of picket volunteers around here.
Keith Jones is the ISTC's South Yorkshire organiser. Already he's had his knuckles rapped by his union bosses in London over the secondary picketing.
Our Executive Council have advised the division, or at least the members of the union in this division, that we shouldn't be picketing private steel makers in the Sheffield area, and we've responded to that. We've left a token picket on in a monitoring situation.
But your quarrel is surely with British Steel. It's not with the private sector, it's not with the docks, it's not with the ports, it's not with British Leyland, and yet that's where you seem to be concentrating all your effort.
Well, we believe that the steel sector was carefully selected by the government as a trial of strength of the British labour movement and of trade unionists in general, and we believe that they chose steel because they know that the only way to win a steel strike is to stop importation of steel and general steel movement that would replace the BSC orders. BSC was shut down within a day, there's no question of that, but we could be on strike for 3 years against BSC if we allowed foreign steel to be coming into this country and replacing that order situation.
The South Yorkshire and Humberside Central Strike Committee have taken a positive decision that all private steel makers will be picketed and stopped from making steel. That's the only way we can win this dispute. And I must
Fighting words to a mass meeting at Stocksbridge near Sheffield. Nobody minds that at this stage this is not official union policy.
We've been successful in closing a number of plants down and a number of stockholders down. That success has given the kind of morale booster that the lads on the picket line need.
But that success has not so far extended to Hadfields, a private steel firm whose management and workforce have so far managed to outwit the pickets and keep steel moving at their 2 plants in Sheffield. Hadfields illustrates clearly the secondary picketing dilemma. Most of the workers are members of the ISTC, again the same union as the men on the picket lines, but they've no quarrel with their own management and don't want to get involved. According to Hadfields, their workers already have better conditions than the BSC men. A 39-hour week, a minimum wage of £80 and an average wage of around £115. In the last 3 years, the companies say they've halved the workforce and increased the potential production by 50%, all without internal industrial trouble. They claim a close cooperation with the unions, a cooperation that's been maintained during the strike with twice-daily meetings between the board and the shop stewards. At one of those sessions, the meeting heard that the private sector would be called out from next Sunday, despite the representations of the shop stewards convener, Mick Adams.
We feel that the BSC lads have embarked on a battle which they are losing, and now they're saying to us, well, you're our big guns, we'll fetch you up, you'll win that battle for us. And the unfortunate part is, as far as we're concerned, that we've got to go to our membership now, and we've got to say to them, OK, lads, show solidarity, fight the battle, but at the end of the day, there's nothing in it for you.
The last hope for his members comes tomorrow when the Employers Association ask for a court order to stop the ISTC calling the private sector out. They claim the union's action is political, not industrial. Hadfield's chairman, Derek Norton, is particularly bitter about the pickets.
We had secondary picketing through the transport strike and through the engineering strike, and since the main market for our products is the automotive industry, we all know only too well of the disruption in the automotive industry, and we at Hadfields have been affected by every strike.
If the new Industrial Relations Bill were law now, you would have the opportunity of either applying for an injunction against the strikers or suing them for damages. Would you sue?
We would. I must elaborate upon that categorical statement. I've mentioned to you that for 3 years we have been beleaguered by secondary picketing of one sort or another. Now, the result of the decision taken at the ISTC means that the future of this company is put at risk. Because regrettably, whilst the British Steel Corporation people, however long the strike goes on, we as the taxpayers eventually will pay the bill.
But when we went to Templeborough Rolling Mills to put the same question to Clive Morgan, He was not sure that the new law would have helped him.
One wonders where we would be in a case like this. The official policy of ISTC is that the private sector should not be picketed. One wonders whether we could sue individuals, but surely that would mean that the individuals would then just be moved to another side if we tried to do that.
You're suggesting that because it's not ISTC policy, you couldn't sue the union direct?
One wonders. I don't know. I don't know.
Another visitor to Mr. Morgan's plant was the Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party Industry Committee, Mr. Michael Grills MP, who heard at first hand Mr. Morgan's doubts. So TVI invited Mr. Grills to discuss the new bill and the question of secondary picketing in general with Arthur Scargill. Did Mr. Grills think that if the bill were now law, it would have been helpful to employers faced with secondary picketing?
I think it might. And I can't put it more strongly than that, because it really gives a power to employers. I can't say, if the bill were now law, whether employers would make use of that law. But it would give them the possibility, if they felt that their business was being damaged by the secondary picketing and that their contracts were being interfered with, it would give them the power to seek an injunction to stop those pickets breaking the contract.
What the Conservative Party really mean is that they want to stop picketing where it's effective. And provided picketing isn't effective, they're not particularly worried.
Is that what they mean, Mr. Grills?
I think that is not right, because the bill makes it perfectly legal, and nobody proposes to stop effective picketing by a workforce against its employer with whom it's in a dispute. Yes.
Well, let's get this perfectly clear. The reason why the government are taking this sort of legislation to the House of Commons is to stop effective picketing. There's no talk about secondary production. For example, if we produce a commodity in a factory that happens to be in dispute, and that commodity is then produced somewhere else, the design of the Conservative bill would allow that to continue if the employer at that other factory decided to take out an injunction to stop so-called secondary picketing.
Yeah, but
I can assure you of this, that irrespective of the legislation, in the same way as our forefathers, we will continue to picket where it is essential to picket in order to win our dispute. And if that means putting us in jail, then the Conservative Party and the Conservative courts will have to put us in jail.
Well,
it may take football stadiums to do it.
The history of the trades union movement shows that there's almost been, I think, no case in which trades unions have ignored an injunction of a court not to do something or maybe to do something. They've always obeyed it. And I believe that trades unions do obey the law and do obey injunctions, and history of the past always has proved that to be the case. I believe that will be the case in the future. Of course, if Mr. Scargill wants to disobey the law and get himself into prison, there's nothing that a government or anybody else can do to stop him.
Can you see no circumstances in which secondary picketing would be justified? And I'd ask you to cast your mind back to the lorry drivers' strike. How could they possibly have prosecuted their case without using secondary picketing?
Well, under the new Act, or bill as it now is, still the employment bill, lorry drivers would be perfectly free to picket the place from where they are managed. In other words, the firm, the depot from which they operate, yes. But I think most people, in looking back a year ago, when the transport drivers dispute, really thought it was wrong to bring firms to their knees who were not actually a party to that dispute. Now, this is what we're really saying.
During the lorry drivers' dispute, if the lorry drivers themselves had simply picketed their own depots, there would have been no purpose in having a strike. Secondly, in the case of the coal industry, we have large stocks of coal which we produce at central depots. And if we didn't picket those central depots, quite frankly, it would be a self-defeating exercise. But under the terms of your bill, if we picketed those central depots or the power stations, it would give the right to the employer to take out an injunction to stop that. Now, I'm simply saying to you this, that in those circumstances, if an employer does take out an injunction against a union, it will escalate the whole scope of that dispute from a mere industrial dispute to a political dispute. And I would have thought your political party had learned the lessons of history, because Ted Heath, in 1972, decided to enter into the arena of industrial relations. Having done so, he found himself facing a political rebuff from the miners' union and from the TUC. And if an employer in this situation takes out an injunction against an individual union, I am certain that it will be a catastrophic result for the whole of Britain, because the rest of the trade union movement will come inevitably to the assistance of that union.
But this is not going to accept
that.
This is, Mr. Scargill, this is a question of crude trade union power, really. What I think people don't like seeing, and I see what you want to do, is to try and bring the whole country out behind those people, to bring the country to their knees, so that every single time there is a strike, it is the naked trades union power that wins. Now that won't necessarily damage the government, but it will damage, as I've said just now, other people's jobs and throw them out of work. It will lose orders for this country, it will lose business, firms will close, jobs will permanently go. Now what we are trying to say is, it's perfectly all right to, when you're in dispute with your employer, to picket, to go on strike, and that's perfectly normal. But don't try and bring everybody else down into your own dispute.
We have never suggested that the whole trade union movement come out on strike. What we're trying to do is this. We're trying to establish the right of trade unionists, as we've always had it, to picket those places, probably where our own product is stored or is utilised. There is nothing wrong with doing that.
Can I bring you back to this word Mr. Scargill keeps using, which is catastrophe, and he's saying that the use of an injunction against secondary pickets would have a catastrophic effect. What's your reply to that?
Well, I think we must wait and see. I rest what I believe on the fact that the vast majority of trade unionists are law-abiding people.
Mr. Scargill, if the bill becomes law, will it change your tactics and your union's tactics?
It will certainly not change my tactics, and I do not believe it will change the tactics of my union, and I'm quite convinced that the vast majority of members of the TUC will also continue to operate as they always have done.
Can I ask you this finally, Mr. Grills? Is it your view that the bill will help or exacerbate industrial relations in this country, in view of what you've heard from Mr. Scargill?
Well, I don't think Mr. Scargill represents anything more than an extremist minority of a trades union movement, and I agree we could argue about that, but I believe that's the case. And I believe all the opinion polls that we've seen and the result of the election proves that the vast majority of people want to see some restriction, some restraint on unnecessary secondary picketing, damaging secondary picketing that put people's jobs at risk. That's what we're doing, and we believe, therefore, it'll protect people's jobs and be much fairer, therefore, to everybody.
I don't believe it will work. I think it is doomed to defeat in the same way that the 1971 Industrial Relations Act was doomed to defeat. And in the process, you may well find that it defeats the Tory government.
Both sides see it as a classic confrontation, might against right. But each side sees the other as having the might, and itself as possessing the right. Do you accept what you're doing is secondary picketing?
I accept what we're doing is right, to get the strike over with.
What do you think you're doing here, primary picketing or secondary picketing?
Secondary picketing. We're stopping steel. We're stopping steel.
That's secondary picketing, really?
As far as we're concerned, it's picketing.
Whether we'd be sued or what, I think we'd still be on gates.
If we sue the union should foot the bill for the losses which this company sustains.
We can't meet the damages of a firm like this, of course it wouldn't stop us.
The proposals that the Conservative government have tabled, I must admit, I wonder whether it has enough teeth.
The point is, if we don't secondary picket, we haven't got a chance with these firms because they're taking all our work.